the power of leadership and what leadership really was. And one of the earliest lessons, and I want to share with you a couple of stories that really lay the foundation in my leadership. One of the first lessons that I learned about leadership, that leadership wasn't about position, but leadership was about people. It was about people. And I learned this from a gentleman by the name of Command Sergeant Major Babs. Command Sergeant Major Babs was the leader of our battalion. And I had the opportunity to work for Sergeant Major Babs. And in working for Sergeant Major Babs, I was his assistant. And so I would go around with him. I would walk with him around the post. And very soon, I recognized that he was a different leader. He was a different leader. He went around and he would ask everybody that he came in contact with how they were doing, how their family was doing, how their children was doing. And this fascinated me. And so after about a couple of weeks of walking around, seeing him do this each and every day, ask the soldiers how they were doing, ask them how their families were doing, we got back to the office and I said, Sergeant Major, number one, how do you remember all the soldiers' names? And number two, how do you remember about their family? How do you do that? And I'll never forget what he told me. He says, because that's my job. Now, initially, I didn't understand what he meant by that, but we began to hang out just a little bit more, and I began to understand what he meant by people. Understanding and caring about people was his job. And so I learned as a leader, the people are the number one priority. Your teammates, your employees, whatever you call them. We have all different types of names, but whatever you call them, right? That's the most important currency that you're working with. It's your people. And so as I began to develop in my leadership, what I learned was that my soldiers, that's what we called them in the Army, those that I led, my soldiers, they performed for me a whole lot better when they knew I cared for them. When they knew I cared for them, they performed a whole lot better. And so my thing was, whenever I had a new soldier come into my squad, my thing was I wanted to develop trust with them as soon as possible. I wanted them to understand that I wanted them to be successful. Even though the military had a mission for them, even though the Army had a mission for them, even though our battalion had a mission for them, I wanted them to know that I was invested in their success. And I wasn't just invested in their success because it was going to make me look good. I was invested in their success because it was going to make them look good. Second story I want to share with you. After I left the military, I had the opportunity to be a pastor, and I was a pastor for 8 years. And once again, this is now an environment where you're dealing with mostly a volunteer team. Your staff, a lot of them are not going to be a part of the paid staff. You're going to be dealing with a lot of volunteers. So how do you inspire volunteers? How do you inspire people to go above and beyond that's not getting paid? How do you do that? Once again, it's what I learned in the military. It's about the people. It's about the people. And so once again, in this environment that seemed very different than being in the military, the principles were the same. If you care for people, people will perform. If you care for people, people will perform. And so once again, in this environment, in the church environment, working with 100+ volunteers, it was about caring. It was about letting them know that I care about them. And let me tell you the culmination of what this looked like. When I made the decision to stop pastoring and to move here to Arizona, I went and I talked with my leadership staff, And I told him what my plan was, that I was going to be turning over the churches to other pastors, and I was going to be moving to Arizona. Now, I had never been to Arizona. I didn't know anybody in Arizona. I just felt, though, Arizona was the place that I should be. Well, let me tell you what happened. Something amazing happened. As we were preparing, my wife and I and our family was preparing to move to Arizona from Germany. Let me say it again. We were moving to Arizona, a place we had never been before, didn't have any connections, and we were moving. This was an international trip. This wasn't just coming from California or New Mexico to Arizona. This was coming from a whole different country. And as we were preparing to come to Arizona, eight families from my leadership said, we're moving to Arizona with you. Now, let me tell you this. I wasn't planning to come to Arizona and start a church. I was coming to Arizona to start my consultant company. And so I shared with the leaders, I said, wait a minute. I'm not going there to start a church. We're not going to have a church. I don't have anything for you to do. And each of these families talked to us one-on-one, and they said, we just want to still be connected with you. No matter what you're doing, we want to be connected with you. But I said, wait a minute. Listen, you got to understand me. I don't have a job for you. I don't have a house for you. I'm not going there to start a church. We're not going to have a church. Why would you come? Why would you move all the way from Germany to Arizona? I believe it's because of the culture that we created inside of our ministry. I believe those individuals knew that I cared for them, that I loved them. And I know we don't like to use that word in leadership, but they knew that I loved them. They knew that I would go to bat for them. They knew that I would do anything for them. And so when it came time for us to move, those eight families moved here to Arizona with me and my wife and my daughter. We had our daughter, my wife was pregnant with our son, Champ, at the time. I don't suggest anybody do an international move while your wife is pregnant. I don't suggest that for anybody. But they ended up moving here, and we ended up creating such a bond. We're family now. So they went from just being members and leaders inside of our ministry to becoming family. We go on cruises together. We just recently celebrated our 14th Thanksgiving together being here in Arizona. We almost celebrate every holiday together, birthdays, anniversaries. We go on cruises together. Next year, we're going on another family trip back to Europe, so the younger kids that are in our group can see where we all met. But that all happened because I was intentional about creating a culture for our ministry. I was intentional about ensuring that they knew that I cared for them. And so my question for you, what are you intentional about? As a leader, what are you intentional about? Yesterday, we talked about this, and I shared with you that at the dinner table, you're a part of the dinner table conversation. When that spouse asks their partner, how was work today? When the kids ask that parent, how was work today? You play a big part in that. You play a big part.